Hi, PJ. Welcome to the revolutionary journey.
Yes, welcome. Hi, Carolina. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. It's been a lot of things are changing. It's the fall, and I think fall is this time when we need to gather a little bit of energy before winter, the
Yes,
last strike of the winter tunnel. Yeah.
exactly.
How about you?
I'm not in Helsinki yet. I decided to take a holiday, so I will be there in a couple of weeks. What you're saying resonates with me. What resonates with me last year, right before the winter or the darkness, as they call it
Yes.
in Finland. So I'm so happy with the sunshine, but I know that the reality of winter, the darkness is coming to see it, what that looks like.
Mm, yeah, that's always the challenge. We've been discussing what is the next thing that we want to talk about and share with whoever is listening. And what do you want to talk about today, PJ?
So I think from last week, we're talking a little bit about self-doubt and growth. And I forgot who had mentioned this, but for me, growth starts in the mirror, right? And so I feel like we want to talk about personal
Mhm.
growth and how we navigate that, what that is, what that isn't, what it should be, and things like that.
Yeah, that's definitely a worthy topic. And I feel also a bit like we have been, and maybe not in between the two of us, we've been talking about it a lot. But also, you hear a lot about personal growth recently, right? It's been one of these very buzzy words, and it's not always very clear what are we talking about when we're talking about personal growth, and how do you define it for yourself? Because it's about like what is personal growth for you versus what does it mean for other people, and whose responsibility it is one of my favorite topics as well. So tell me from your perspective, when you think about personal growth, what are you talking about?
Yes, great. So I think personal growth, you first need to separate that gaining new skills, gaining new knowledge, that's separate than growth. That's gaining exactly what I mentioned, new skills, new growth, or new knowledge, right? Personal growth, I feel, is more in line with your person, with your character. So let's say, for example, I'm somebody who I said this before, I tend to be a bit more bullish and quick to judge a situation. My journey on developing that has been okay, I need to put these skills and these knowledge in place for me to stop that and build a buffer for me to take 20, 30, 60 seconds to stop and judge. So for me, personal growth, just to be succinct, is distinguishing between gaining new skills and knowledge and actually growing into your character and your person. What about you?
I agree with that. I like that definition you just gave. I think there's different things about skills, even though there are some personal skills that we can work on, but there's like different thing about skills and different things about really becoming the person that you admire. And that's how I like to think about personal growth. It's more about becoming your own hero, right? It's like when you think about the people that you admire that are having the values that are most important for you in the world. And when you look at those people, they're really like, wow, like that's just an incredible person. I think the goal at the end of our life is to look back at your whole life and say, wow, what an amazing person I've been. And that doesn't mean that you got everything right during the journey because nobody does. That's just an illusion. But it's this idea that I am living consciously with my values, with who I want to be, and I constantly show up in the world in a way that makes me proud of myself.
I like that. And I especially like the way two things that you said, like you want to be the person you admire, right? So it's kind of like being your own hero. And then the second thing that you mentioned really resonated is the being conscientious about it, being intentional, right? Growth doesn't happen by accident. It's an active practice. So I like that.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that very often when we read about or listen about personal growth, it's always about like, read these books and so on. But we had this very nice conversation, which I absolutely love, that personal growth starts with looking in the mirror, meeting the person you see there and acknowledging what's working, what's not working. And very importantly, starting to acknowledge your own ego and starting to find a way to let it go.
Exactly. So for me, I counsel a lot of my colleagues of, okay, when they want to become leaders, when they want to become managers or supervisors, my first question is, I was like, okay, I asked them to define it. And what I'm trying to understand from them is, do you want the feeling and prestige and credibility that comes with being a leader? Or do you actually want to understand, appreciate, and evolve the responsibilities of being a leader? Because I'm going to be honest, now that I've been a leader for some time, I'm maybe not as interested as I was before because it does take a
Mhm.
lot from you as a person, as a professional, right? So it's like, okay, your ego, you really need to check it, right? So when you're looking in the mirror, you're like, okay, who is PJ Cruz the professional? What did
Yeah.
they prioritize and things like that. So I like to call out on the ego.
Yeah, I think it's an important part of how we show up, right? It's like the personal growth. I like to think that a lot of it happens when life gets tough, when everything goes your way and the universe is aligned. It's very easy to drink that up and get a little bit drunk on the success. It happens to a lot of people, and myself as well, and a lot of us, where things are just going your way, and you're like, yes, let's go. And that's great, yeah. But it's also a season when things stop going your way. And kind of, it's not a, maybe I don't think about it as stopping yourself in those times that are great, but maybe acknowledging that this too shall pass. And that kind of brings you back to earth and helps you still be who you want to be and how you want to show up. Because sometimes when we are just like really things are going our way, it's easy to become inflated. It's easy to be like, oh yeah, and now I deserve this, and now I deserve. And I know from personal experience, right? Like at some point when in your career, when you go and things go your way, and you're just like, okay, I've got this done, I've got this done, I've got this done, and now I deserve all this. Yeah, I've worked on so hard. Like why don't I deserve to get this new promotion because look at me for the last 2 years, huh? And then it's like, no, come on, just stop.
I like to think of those as good distractions from
Mm.
development, distractions from growth, right?
Yeah.
Another way to say it is like resting on your laurels. When you say development also happens largely when you're going through tough times, I agree with that. It really tests your mettle, right? It tests your ability to say, even when things seem against me, even when things seem like everything is going to fail, I have a decision to make to keep doing this and keep growing and trying to find the message and the lesson here. Or I can say, this doesn't align with my journey anymore,
Yeah.
myself, right? You can choose to let growth and development happen to you, or you can choose to chart it. You can choose to be intentional and actually drive it yourself.
Absolutely. I really agree with what you're saying. I think there's this part where, and maybe I can tell you from the point of my career over the last years, what I noticed at some point was maybe somewhere last year when I realized that a lot of the decisions of the jobs I take, where I live, and so on, were sort of made for me. I have been working in certain areas, and then I've been contacted by a recruiter here, and I felt like, well, actually, why not? Let's do that. And then contacted by a recruiter here, it's like, okay, actually, it sounds good. Let's do that. And it's not that those opportunities were right, because I learned a lot in all of them, something that works, something that don't, as always. But it was more just going with the flow, and that's okay. But I don't think all of those decisions were very intentional for me, and I made them fully consciously thinking about the whole spectrum of my life rather than just work. Is this good for my career? But is this work for everything else that I want in my life as well?
Exactly. And I think that happens to most people, right? Because,
Mm.
you in recruiting, you call those passive candidates, people who are not really happy or contented with where they're at, but then they get somebody like a hiring manager or a recruiter reach out like, hey, your profile could be really interesting. So you're really playing at that ego and saying,
Yeah.
no, you're more than qualified to do this. It's
Yeah.
bigger. And so at the end of the day, I'm like, it's a sales pitch, right?
Yeah.
I think this type of growth, what we're talking about, and this is just my feeling and my hypothesis, I think this happens around the time that we're at right now, around the time when we have at least 8, 10 years of experience. And then a good chunk of that is within the leadership capabilities, right? So now we actually have the crossroads of, okay, where do I actually want to take my career? Like, what's the story of my career? At one point, we talked about you being a tech generalist, right? Do we want to continue to develop that? Do we want to continue to be broader? Or is there an opportunity to go more deep into something, right? And so I think that's also growth. Like it's asking yourself, do I want to continue refining the skills that I've already not mastered, but refining the skills close to being mastered? Or am I done with that and I move on to something else? I'll use an example for me here. When I came to Finland, I came with the intention to only do a 12-month rotation. I'd done things like that. I've scaled organizations and all stuff. So this wasn't a new skill, so to speak. It was just a new market. And then I think 7 months in, I decided, hey, part of my growth journey, I actually want to become a global professional. Because up until that point, I was only working in the Americas and a little bit of Africa. And my intention for that was like, okay, professionally, I want to be able to say within 5, 6 years that I can actually take on a global executive leadership role and scale it. That was me being intentional in that growth journey. It relates to what you're saying of like, what do I want to do now from this point on? How can I do that intentionally?
Absolutely. And I guess this is the part where personal growth and who you want to become and how you get to that really starts when you are going through this journey of self-awareness, as we were discussing before. You get to the point where, like, actually, who do I want to be? Who am I
Exactly.
now? How do I want to change that? Or maybe not. Maybe I'm really happy with what I am. What are the things in my life that are very valuable that I want to continue and which are not? It goes back into the energy. Out of all the things that I'm doing, what are the things that gives me energy and which ones are not? And if there's some things that are not giving me energy, can I understand why? Can I start like becoming more curious about that and see like, hey, what is there that is not resonating with me? It really is about looking in the mirror, thinking for yourself, why am I where I am? And how do I feel about the place where I am? Is there another place where I would rather be? And if so, then why? Because it's the other hand, it's the grass is always greener on the other side. That's the problem that we have.
Do you have any
Yeah.
examples of when you looked in the mirror and you decided, I'm actually not going to do that anymore. I'm going to shift away from that. You don't have to share the specifics, but I would love to understand the mechanics behind it. How did you decide this is not for me? And how did you chart your path forward from there?
Yeah, for me personally, let me tell you a short story. When I was about to become a parent, there's a lot of people that want to give you advice, right? And I tend to not listen to advice. But there is one piece of advice that really sticked with me, and that was just be the person you want your kids to be. And it's like, wow, that's changed a lot in my life and the way that I approached it. It was always there with me somewhere in the background. Be the person that you want your kids to be. And then that also decided a lot of the things, like how I do things. Like I have this, maybe this is a very silly example, but I don't want my kids to cross the red lights. And that means that even when I am without my kids crossing the street, I will not cross the red light because I don't want them to do that. It's a super silly thing that I have an influence on because then I'm more like what I actually am after. But the thing that happened to me over time, and especially as I got a little bit into building up my career and my work, thinking like, oh, this is nice, it's important, let's do this, let's do that. I kind of maybe at some point too much attention into that instead of the other parts of my life. I started to be the person working on this work-life balance. I realized very recently that the whole concept of the work-life balance is actually wrong because it implies that when you're working, you're not living, and when you're living, you're not working. And you're doing both all the time, right? There's different types of work that you're doing. There's work that you do for yourself. There's work that you do in the house, in the garden, whatever. There's always something. But then there's this idea that you have to have the balance between the two and figure out what works. I gave up on that. I just want to have a life where I can be and do things that are important for me, show up as I want to show up, and then the rest will follow. I have this strong belief that when I am more of the person that I admire, then this will all happen. And I'm not saying that it will happen on its own. It will happen because I'm working to make it happen, but I'm not sacrificing things anymore to make that happen.
I completely agree with that. So here's my evolution of this work-life balance concept, right? 7 years ago, I said, no, it's not work-life balance, it's life-work balance. I have to balance my life and then my work, right? And then recently it's been like, no, I just have to balance my life and then work will be factored in later. I think you need to understand that it's 100% through the lens and the platform of privilege, meaning
Yes.
I can walk away from a job and go without income for a little bit. That's the way I've built my career and my life up until this point. The unfortunate thing with me is that I have experienced the extreme end of work-life balance, meaning I literally would work 75, 90 hours a week at one point and be like, okay, I'm just going home to sleep and brush my teeth at this point, right? So like what is the actual point? I wouldn't feel guilty about taking time off, but I would get guilt texts and emails like, are you really sure you want to take this time off? And I'm like, yes, I do actually. You got to find your own perspective on the concept of work-life balance or whatever you want to call it. And then you got to find a workplace that matches that. It's through a platform and a lens of privilege. I completely understand that. But that's my take on it.
No, I agree. And the thing is that it has to work for you, right? And it has to allow you to just be in balance because that's the goal. The goal is to be in balance, and you need to figure out for yourself what keeps you in balance because there is no two people who are the same. And that is something that we often lose when we try to think like, oh, there's this idea of recently, what was it, that 996 or whatever, like this different like work that you work 6 days, 6 hours, 6 days per week. That's been a big thing. And I don't care. As long as it works for you, just do what works for you, right? And that balance will be different for you, will be different for me because we have different lives and I want different things for myself. At the end of the day, that's the most important. Once you like get to that place, get to that like place where like, oh, okay, this is what I want. Now, kind of, how can I, again, with that self-awareness, with being, the person that you admire, start thinking of like, how do I design where I am or the
Mhm.
future state to help me get there, right? Because it's also honestly not, like you said, not everyone can just say, hey, I'm going to quit my job and do whatever I want for the next 6 months. No, that's not realistic. But you can take small steps to start designing that place that you want to be. I've been thinking and writing a lot recently about how we are really shaped by the places where we are. And that's normal. That's just what happens to all of us. But we forget that we get to design those places as well. So if we want to be a certain way, we can change the places where we are to help us be that person that we want to be.
Exactly. And I want to add things here because yes, you can forget it. You can also be never told that, right? So I think it's a
Mm,
reminder that sometimes you're not told that you get to design it. So as part of your development
George.
and growth, you really need to be able to build up a little bit of courage to say, actually, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to try it this way, right? So again, you can either forget it or you can not be told it. And if you're not being told it, then I think that's where self-development, self-growth needs to come and be like, hey, you know, now that I'm 2 years, 3 years into my career, I'm getting a bit more stable. I'm maturing my approach to work and life balance and all of that stuff. So don't want to forget that side of the coin as well.
No, absolutely, you're right. And then there's this part that I tend to do myself, and I know some of my friends do it as well, is that we tend to make those expectations in our head, but those are unspoken expectations that we just think are there and very often don't check. Yeah. There's this idea that I need to be in the office every day at 8:30 in the morning, but nobody actually told me that. Just because other people are there, and it's like, maybe if it's a specific expectation, then maybe someone at some point will tell you. But until they do, don't necessarily assume it is.
Exactly. In sociology and also a little bit of psychology, there's this concept of the unspoken social contract,
Hmm.
right? And so that
Yes.
basically it's like these unspoken rules, but everybody conforms to them. For example, I worked at a company where they didn't have a dress code, right? And it was one of my very first questions because and if you know me, like before I go, I am the person that actually reads through all the materials to make sure I understand it. Early in my career, I had to write employee handbooks, which was boring, but gave me a deeper appreciation for
Yeah.
the need for it, right? And so I noticed that that wasn't there. And so I'd asked one of the coordinators, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have a dress code." And I was like, "Okay, but how do I come dressed?" And so like I put more thought into that before going into work. I was like, why the hell am I thinking about what I'm wearing? And then when I got there, being the sociologist that I am, I did a little scan of the office and I was like, okay, like the tech people dressed like this. It's a bit more casual. There's more pajamas and all that. And then if you go to the business side, there's more suits and more spiffiness. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm technically on the business side. So should I adopt that? These unspoken rules or expectations are unspoken
Yeah.
and also not enforced. So
Hmm.
you need to really be brave enough to ask these questions and be comfortable enough to go against the norm or perceived norm, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing, at some point you build up the courage to do those things, right? Until someone tells you off, always. But yeah, going a little bit back to personal growth and being self-aware and building that, there's one important part that we sometimes, especially in the companies, tend to forget about: the ownership of your personal growth. I have been in many situations where it was kind of expected, where people that I worked with in my teams were sort of expecting me to come up with the areas where they need to grow. I'm like, it is your life, your career. We need to make sure that the areas, especially specific skills, are aligned with what is needed in this role and what is expected for this role. But there is also, you got to take ownership. No one can tell you what you need to do with your life.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the trends that I navigate as a people leader. So for
Mm.
example, when we're building up a performance management philosophy and approach, I tend to get one type of leader that wants to not have to think about leadership and development. Somebody who wants to pull a catalog from the shelf and say, hey, you're not doing this, you should be doing this. And here's a prescribed
Yeah.
curriculum from HR. That's also why I think HR gets a bad rep because they don't really understand that you're not supposed to know everything. You're supposed to enable your teams to develop. I like your approach where, hey, this is your journey. I need you to help me understand what you're trying to develop so I can look at my capabilities and how I can encourage and enhance your journey.
Yeah.
That's really the job of a leader when it comes to development, right? Self development, self growth, it starts from you driving a point, looking in the mirror and deciphering what you like, what you don't like, what you aspire to be, what's inspirational, things like that. And then manifesting that and sharing that with yourself and the people around you, your teams, your manager, your loved one, your spouse, etc.
Making sure they know and that they can support, and be specific about what support do you expect from them, right? Because that also can be different for everyone, and I might need something from you. When I set my personal growth targets, I could say, hey, this is what I need from PJ, but if PJ doesn't know, I cannot expect PJ to actually help me with that, right? That's something that we maybe I myself as well very often forget that just because something is clear in your head, it doesn't mean it's clear in their head unless you actually tell them. Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to share a development journey on that because whenever somebody's telling me or like venting or telling me a problem, my north is always to problem solve. So I've learned to ask the question, okay, you're telling me this, do you want to solve or do you want to sulk? Meaning,
Hmm.
do you actually want to talk about this, iterate this, Or are you just sulking? Are you venting? Am I just a soundboard to absorb everything and yep, like, that sucks. Or like, oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that's an amazing way of approaching a lot of these conversations. I do something very similar. It's like, do you want an advice, or do you want to be listened, or do you want to actually, problem solve together? Very often, I would myself feel disempowered when I would say, hey, this is this problem and this is not working and I don't know how to deal with that and that. And then there's like, okay, let me go and fix it for you. I'm like, but I didn't really want you to go and solve it for me. I actually don't mind solving it. I just wanted to get your advice on a couple of things, how I want to approach it, and then figure out together the best way forward. Yeah, so that check. And again, it's a little bit about the once you get to the place of a bit more self-awareness, you can become better at communication with others because you can better understand yourself and what you're after, and you can tell that to other people. Because even if you have you're working with people who maybe don't necessarily will ask you, but you can go to a person and say like, I'm gonna sulk now for 5 minutes and then we're gonna solve it together, and then you say, okay, fine, do that.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
We have the
Yeah.
guidelines. Good.
Yeah. So again, this comes to tell people what you want, what you're expecting from them. Then that makes a lot of interactions way easier. On the topic of personal growth, is there anything else that you would like to discuss that you think is useful for people to hear?
I don't think we've covered it. Maybe we'll just do a little recap, at least on my end, right? So I think when we're thinking about personal growth, development, whatever you want to call it, there's three things that come to mind. Number one, you really need to distinguish between whether you're netting new skills or not and knowledge versus actually developing and growing your character and your person. Number two, personal growth and development, we agree, starts within the mirror. A very honest, uncomfortable conversation of what's happening, what's not happening, and what you want, right? And then number three, personal growth and personal development is both a commitment, a constant practice, and it needs to be intentional. Sprinkled in with a little bit of courage.
And that courage will come with action. The first step will always be without it. The lack of courage is sometimes you wait for the courage to come, it will not happen. So the best way forward is to lose yourself in the action and see what happens.
Exactly. And if anything fails, think of it as a geometric line, right? So you have 1 point of data that shows there's something happening. You have 2 points of data like, okay, there's a second one like, we don't know if it's trending up or down. And then you have a third point in geometry, 3 points of data confirm whether the line is straight or not. So
that's true. And the line is never straight. It's always
No.
squiggly going because the moment something starts working, something else stops working. But that's fine. That's just how life is. Nobody ever promised it's gonna be easy. Yeah. And easy is not making you grow.
not fun. Easy is not fun.
No. Yeah. Easy is not fun. All right.
Exactly. Bye, Carolina.
Thank you, PJ. This was great. See you next time.
You too. Ciao.
Ciao.